Sometimes the biggest moments in politics, they aren't the loud ones, they're the quiet ones. And this is a story about one of those moments, about a single question that wasn't just looking for an answer. It was a test of the very idea of credibility and power itself. So picture this, a formal political hearing. You know the vibe, the steady back and forth of questions, the carefully prepared answers, and then this happens. Not a big shouting match, but a sudden collapse into quiet. It's a kind of heavy silence where everyone in the room and you at home, you just instinctively lean in a little closer. And here's the wild part. This whole mood shift wasn't from some dramatic accusation or a fiery speech. Nope, it was all triggered by one question, delivered with the calm, steady precision of a surgeon's knife. Okay, so let's really get into what happened in that room. The second Senator Welch asks his question to this official, Patel, the whole atmosphere just changes. The tension wasn't loud, it was heavy. You could feel it. Now, what's so fascinating here is that the question wasn't powerful because it was complicated. Actually, it was devastatingly simple. Its real weight came from history, specifically from the words of the man it was aimed at, Patel himself. To really understand why that room fell silent, we've got to rewind a bit. See, this whole confrontation, this whole trap, it was built on a foundation that Patel himself had laid down years before. See, not long before this hearing, Patel was on the complete other side of this exact issue. He was a very vocal critic of the previous FBI director using the official jet, and he spoke with this total confidence, framing it as a super clear-cut issue of accountability. He set a standard, a very public line in the sand. And this, right here, this lays out the whole conflict perfectly. You have these two versions of the same person just colliding in real time. On one side, you've got Patel the critic, confident, direct. On the other, you have Patel the official, now responsible for the very thing he criticized, and his tone has to be measured and careful. That gap, that's where all the tension lives. And here's the thing you can't forget. The public remembers. When you take a strong stand on something, you create a public record for yourself. And people, well, they expect your principles to stay the same, even when your job title changes. So let's get back to that hearing room, because the way Senator Welch set this up was just a masterclass in political chess. He didn't need to attack. All he had to do was remind everyone of what was already said. And honestly, that's what made it so powerful. There was no big theatrical outrage. Welch just paused, let the weight of that history settle over the room, and then he asked his question. It was calm, it was quiet, and it was completely inescapable. The question itself was so deceptively simple. Welch just asked Patel for his current position on the FBI jet. He wasn't accusing him of anything. He was basically just holding up a mirror and forcing Patel to stare at his own past words. And that's why the room froze. This stopped being a simple policy discussion. It instantly became a very public, very raw test of credibility. Could Patel possibly square what he said then with what he was doing now? Everything hinged on that one moment. So how do you even begin to answer a question like that? Patel was suddenly walking this political tightrope. His past was on one side, his present on the other, and every single word he was about to say was going to be put under a microscope. The very first thing everybody noticed was the change in how he spoke. That sharp, confident, crystal-clear tone of the critic, it was gone, replaced by the careful, measured, almost painstakingly deliberate voice of an official, choosing his words very, very carefully. Okay, so Patel's strategy here was basically to reframe the entire issue. First, he starts talking about the responsibility of the job. Then he brings up all the complexities, security things you can't see from the outside. And finally, he justifies it all by citing official protocol. He was building a case that he hadn't changed his mind. He just saw things differently now that he had all the info. But here it is. This is the unspoken question just hanging in the air after he's done talking. If all those complexities and protocols are valid reasons now, weren't they also valid back when he was criticizing the last guy? And if they were, why didn't they matter to him then? That's the contradiction. And there's just no way to talk your way out of it. So after a moment like that, the story isn't just in the hearing room anymore. It escapes into the wild, into the court of public perception. And out there, the narrative is no longer controlled by the people who were actually in the room. And right away, the public story splits into two different camps. For one group, this was a perfect example of accountability in action, a leader finally being forced to answer for his past. For the other group, it was just a lesson in the reality of power, proof that things always look different once you're on the inside. So what's the long-term damage from something like this? Well, an exchange like this, it becomes a quiet little reference point. It becomes the lens through which all of Patel's future actions and statements are going to be viewed. It might not destroy a person's credibility overnight, but it can absolutely chip away at it over time. This one single exchange is so powerful because it's a symbol, isn't it? It represents a pattern we've all seen in leadership and politics. It is so much easier to criticize from the sidelines than it is to lead from the center of the arena. And that really brings us to the core lesson here. A person's perspective is almost guaranteed to change when they take on more responsibility. The true test of a leader isn't trying to avoid that change. It's being able to explain it, to bridge that gap, in a way that feels honest and actually keeps people's trust. So we're left with this big question, really. We know that power changes perspective. It just does. But is it even possible to navigate that shift, to explain it to the public, without completely shattering the trust you worked so hard to build in the first place? That's the tightrope that every single leader eventually has to walk.